So remember how in the video about our data model, we said that we could either embed or reference the tour guide data. So in this video, I'm going to show you how we could implement embedding tour guide documents into a tour document. So again, in this lecture, we are going to embed user documents into tour documents. And then in the next video, I will show you how we can actually reference users instead of embedding. All right. So the idea here is that when creating a new tour document, the user will simply add an array of user IDs. And we will then get the corresponding user documents based on these IDs and add them to our tour documents. So in other words, we embed them into our tour. Okay, so let's do that here now. So guides will be of the type array. Okay, very simple. And actually, before we implement any code, let me show you as an example how this would work when creating a new tour. So let's go back to Postman here and create new tour. Okay, and so here in our body, we of course would now add the guides in quotes and then specify an array of IDs. Okay, so let's get some user IDs. So get all users. Let's see what we have here. So we have a guide here actually. And so let's get this ID along with the quotes actually. And so let's put that here. And let's add some other ones. So this here as well. And actually just these two. So that should be enough for testing this stuff. Okay. And so this is then how we're going to create a new tour with two guides. Okay. And again, once we then save this tour, we will then behind the scenes retrieve the two user documents corresponding to these two IDs. All right. So let's implement that. And back in our model, the best place of doing that is a pre-save middleware, right? So that will then happen automatically behind the scenes, basically, each time that a new tour is saved. And actually, I don't want to do it here. So we have query. Yeah, here's the document middleware. So let's do that here. So tour schema.pre. All right. Let's call next right away here so that we don't forget it in the end. Okay, so we get this dot guides as an input, and remember that this is going to be an array of all the user IDs, right? And so we will loop through them using a map, and then in each iteration get the user document for the current ID, all right? And we're going to store that inside of guides, all right? So the current element, which is going to be the ID, well, let's actually call it ID to make it a bit easier to understand. And so now we actually need the user, right? So let's go ahead and import that. So const user require, and it's actually in the same folder here. All right. So user dot find by ID with the current ID. All right. But now keep in mind that we actually do need to await this promise here, right? And so therefore the function needs to be marked as async. But now we actually get a problem, all right? Because the map method will assign the result of each iteration to the new element in the guides array. Okay, and so now we have an asynchronous function here, and as you know, that returns a promise. And so right now, this guides array here is basically an array full of promises. Okay, so let's actually call this guides promises. And so we now actually need to run all of these promises basically at the same time. As I showed you a bit earlier in this code, at least if you didn't skip the asynchronous JavaScript section, all we need to do is await promise.all and then guides promise. Okay, and we can directly assign the result of this to this dot guides, and so basically override that simple array of IDs with an array of user documents. Okay, and since we're now using await here, we need to mark this function as async. Okay, give it a save, and I think that's actually it. Okay, so again, we need to use promise.all here because the result of all of this here is a promise. Okay, and so this array here is going to be an array full of promises, which we then run by awaiting promise.all. Okay, so let's actually test this out now. And we already have all of this code here ready. We should just change this name here. So test tour, but the IDs are already here. So let's send this, and our tour name needs to be longer. New test tour. Okay. But now let's take a look at our results. And so indeed, we get our guides here. Okay, so these are the complete documents, and indeed not just the IDs, right? Great. And so this is how we could implement embedding for this tour guides example. Now, this simple code that we implemented here, of course, only works for creating new documents, not for updating them, right? So now we would have to go ahead and implement the same logic also for updates. However, I'm not going to do that, because remember from the video where we modeled our data that there are actually some drawbacks of embedding this data in this case. For example, imagine that a tour guide updates his email address, or they change the role from guide to lead guide. Each time one of these changes would happen, then we would have to check if a tour has that user as a guide, and if so, then update the tour as well. And so that's really a lot of work, and we're not going to go in that direction. All right. Now, I still wanted to show you how embedding really works and how we could implement it in this situation, because I really believe it's very important that you still know how to do everything in case you ever need it in your own applications. Okay. But in this particular situation, we will, instead of embedding, use referencing. And I talked about the reasons for doing so back in that video. Okay. So let's actually go ahead and do that right in the next lecture.